Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to Fundación Telefónica. My name is José María Santamayon, the General Manager of Fundación Telefónica. And on behalf of this foundation and all of us here, and César Alierta, our chairman who is not in Spain, I welcome you. Now, one of the features of this space here is that we make an effort always to bring interesting people who have something interesting to tell us, to share. But today's not the case, I'm afraid. Our guest today is more than interesting. He's terribly exciting. It is a pleasure to introduce you to Walter Isaacson. He's a very enthusiastic person. His biography is difficult to summarize, but also very revealing of his character. Among other things, he's been a journalist, editor of the Times, chairman of CNN. From 2003 to just a few days ago, he was chair and CEO of Aspen Institute, an institute which, in fact, Telefónica Foundation is lucky enough to collaborate in a very enriching way for us. And at present, he's a history teacher at the University of Tulane in New Orleans. That's his native hometown. But now, beyond all this, Walter Isaacson is a master of biography, selective choices, and our guest has drilled down into the lives of Benjamin Franklin, Einstein, Steve Jobs, and now Leonardo Da Vinci. Now, all of them are human beings that share the same drive to know better the world, to improve the lives of people. Innovators is one of Walter's books. People that have left a footprint in the life of people, of society. Without them, the life would be different and probably worse. And this is probably the quality which the author is more interested in, is the transcendence, the impact of the geniuses. And to put it simply, to put it colloquially, utility for humanity. Now, you might ask yourself, for example, what effect or impact in our lives has Leonardo Da Vinci had? This is the work to whom Walter Isaacson has dedicated his last book. And from an artistic point of view, well, his work has admired and imitated worldwide. But perhaps we can't say the same thing of his research about anatomy, botanic, engineering, optics, artistic techniques, urbanism. These were all deliberately kept away, secret, because he, as you know, he wrote in an encrypted manner in his books, and a lot of the things that were never actually developed. So why is that important for us, in addition to his art, if his influence and technique has been fairly limited? I think Walter might enlighten us in some of these subjects, but I think I might dare add that the big thing about Leonardo is the reinvocation of creativity and of learning, and infinite curiosity towards everything, the power of intellect and his willingness to improve lives of everyone. Leonardo will be known mostly as an artist, but as Walter supports, says his work wouldn't have been the same and wouldn't be the work of a genius without his research into nature. Leonardo, in this regard, has many things to share with us. He was a rebel vis-a-vis the conventions back then. Researcher, and always overcoming all his failures. Walter Isaacson shares with us this passion, Leonardo da Vinci's passion, and he managed this because he went straight to direct sources. He's read over 7,000 pages of the Leonardo the Genius. In addition, we can proudly say that both codex that we have in Madrid have been digitalized by Telefónica just a few years ago, and now they're available through the internet for everyone to peruse, not just the original version, but you can see the mirror image in Spanish and Italian and different languages. It's a contribution that Telefónica has made to the study of this genius. And before I leave the floor to Javier Solana and Walter Isaacson, I'd like to make a final comment. By definition, geniuses are unique, singular, and just happen by mere chance. But without the right atmosphere, a genius might be overlooked. Einstein came up with the theory of relativity when he was working in a patent office in Bern. But if he hadn't got if you haven't gone to university, to work in university, maybe he never would be able to complete his work. Likewise, if Leonardo managed to apply all his curiosity and his art, it was because he lived in a society that's relatively open and tolerant, that accepted his achievements and his behavior that was certainly apart from standards. We don't know when to expect a new Leonardo, but we must work to ensure that there is space, comfortable space for this to happen. Areas where new Lovelace can develop their full potential without having to make any sort of sacrifice. So this is what Walter Isaacson has dedicated part of his life, and also Fundación Telefónica want to support him, and of course it's one of our objectives to promote all this work. Now, before I get the floor to Walter Isaacson, there's one person that wants to do an introduction also, Javier Solana. I think he's probably one of the few people in this room that has a biography as complex and complete, or as complete as Walter, and it's very difficult to introduce him. As you know, he's been a little bit of everything. He's been everything in foreign policy in Spain, in Europe. He's been Secretary General of NATO, Minister in Spain, and throughout his life he has also acknowledgements, and chairman of Aspen Institute Spain. But there's three recognitions or acknowledgements that I think personally I find are of special importance. The Carlomagno Award as Europeanist, as Spain, a monarchist, the award that he got from the King Juan Carlos in 2010, and the general manager of Fundación Telefónica, whom we're very fortunate to have him in a trusteeship where he does all his contributions. It's a very, very, very brief summary of a very, very extensive curriculum. And so Javier Solana is going to address it for a few minutes, and then Walter will address us about his book, and then we'll have a Q&A. Thank you very much.
Mis palabras van a...
I'll be brief. And of course, with all of them, I mean, is of course what I mean is acknowledgement and thanks to Telefonica, who has enabled us, allowed us to use this fantastic facility here in downtown Madrid. Also from the Aspen Institute in Spain, that worked very hard to make this real, to make this event. I'm having a fantastic day here with Walter, and also I'd like to thank Walter Isaacson. I've known him for many years, and I know quite a bit, quite well, the United States. A lot of the key VIP people, important people in the United States, and few of them are as relevant as Walter. He's a North American, and he's fully committed with his society. And this commitment that Walter has had with his society is what has enabled him to be such a happy man, and also also productive, because when you read his books, you're surprised. You see, how is it possible to write so much, so clearly, so well studied, so well corrected, so well edited, and you will see, when you walk out, you have a whole collection of books. But also huge commitments. When Karina blew across New Orleans, the president asked him to take care of that, and he rolled up his sleeves, quit everything, and he started working almost exclusively to help the poor people people, all the vulnerable people that have been impacted by the hurricane. He's fully committed, and this is one of the most attractive things of him. When he asked me, after spending some time together in Aspen in the US, if we could open an Aspen Institute here in Spain, I didn't hesitate for a minute. Coming from him, I couldn't say no. So here we are, working with the Aspen Institute in the United States and other Aspen Institutes across Europe, ensuring that cohabitance is genuine, that we can live together. The idea is to live together, but also to do things together. That's what we need to do. We need to do things together, and that's the call that Walter's doing with these characters, huge personalities that have impacted all of us. Just to give you an idea, the depth of his books, of the research. Leonardo Da Vinci, buy it, but then read it. Read, especially the first few pages are actually extraordinary. When Leonardo defines himself in a letter that he wrote, read it, because the description there is fantastic. And I might tell him, I've told him a few times, I'll say it in Spanish today. I read his book on Einstein's biography. That biography, I'm just a physics professor, retired. I know about that. I know a little bit about that. I wanted to say that the way he understands Einstein's thinking and how he describes him for someone that doesn't have scientific background is absolutely extraordinary. I learned from Einstein and I learned from the relativity theory almost more when I had to do that in my career. But I learned a lot from Walter. Walter, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here. Please come back. We know you were in the Prado Museum yesterday. I know you enjoyed. And you should probably do a biography of some of those key characters of the Prado Museum. And what I'll promise you, when you grow up, which I commit to make you write your own biography.
Javier, you are far too kind, and that's why we love you. Thank you very much. And what Javier mentioned briefly is that this, in addition to all these wonderful diplomatic and civic endeavors he did, he was a great physicist. And that's part of my lecture today, is that the most delightful and creative people in the world are those who are interested in everything, like Benjamin Franklin, loving electricity, but also being a great diplomat in Europe. You follow in his footsteps and Einstein's footsteps and Leonardo's. It is great to be here with Telefónica and Aspen, Spain, in a Tech and Society conference, because what I want to talk about is the intersection of technology and the humanities. That is the theme of Leonardo's life. When I first started writing about Steve Jobs, I realized that all the people I had written about, Ben Franklin, Einstein, and then Steve Jobs, loved the connection of the arts to technology. They believed that beauty mattered, and if you connect the humanities to engineering, that's where you're going to be successful. And, as was said earlier, they were in incredibly creative environments. And that's why I'm so happy to be here in Madrid, because there are few places in this world in which creativity, the arts, love of food and music is connected to business and technology, as Telefónica said. And you see that maybe in Berlin or Amsterdam. We saw it in Florence in 1470, Silicon Valley. I hope places like New Orleans can be that way. But you get energized when you're in a place that's a cradle of creativity. Leonardo was born in a tiny village of Vinci, but he had the great good fortune to be born out of wedlock, to be born illegitimate. Otherwise, he would have had to have been a notary, like his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and he would have been sent to university and stuffed full of the scholastic wisdom of the Middle Ages. Instead, he gets to be a disciple of his own experiments. He becomes, as a little boy, somebody who's curious about everything, who puts pebbles and sticks into the little streams in Vinci and sees how the water curls and swirls. We all do that when we're kids. We all have a sense of wonder about the curls and swirls of science. The cool thing about Leonardo da Vinci is even at the end of his life, he's still in his notebook drawing curls and swirls and making stabs at the mathematics of it, because he's always trying to feel the patterns of nature. And the way to feel the patterns of nature is to be curious about everything. Always curious. When he's a young boy, his father, when Leonardo's about age 12, takes him to the nearby town of Florence. Leonardo was also lucky because Florence was one of those places I just talked about, a cradle of creativity. And we have to ask ourselves why. Well, we can start with Leonardo's arrival. He comes as a young man in the 1460s, and he's a misfit. He's illegitimate, he's gay, he's left-handed, he's distracted, he's a vegetarian of all things. And yet he gets to Florence and he's totally embraced by the town of Florence, because it was a town that not only tolerated, but enthusiastically loved people who were different. As Steve Jobs said, creativity comes from the rebels, the misfits, the round pegs in the square hole, the ones who think different. And if you're tolerant, or if you're willing to embrace diversity the way Florence was, you get people like Leonardo. And not only that, there was an influx of things, of people and things happening around the time. The year Leonardo was born, Gutenberg opens his print shop. But the cool thing about Florence is it was filled with cloth merchants who had lots of leftover rags. So they invent rag paper. And it's sort of like the microchip and the computer and the network all being invented at the same time. When you invent printing presses and paper and you bring back the wisdom from all over the world, it's going to be a place where a self-taught kid like Leonardo can thrive. The same year he's born, Constantinople falls. So people are flooding into Florence from the Arab world, bringing things like algebra. And so they invent things like debit and credit bookkeeping. And the Medici family becomes successful because using the new math, they can create new ways of doing venture capital and loans and funding new ventures. So you have great wealth being created by these new bankers, and they're creating great new homes. And they have to show that even though they're successful, they're still very religious and very pious. And so they have to hire a whole lot of artists to paint Madonnas and do little statues for them to show their devotion as opposed to just their wealth. And thus you have studios like the one that Andrea Verrocchio had in Florence, where a young Leonardo becomes the apprentice. We know exactly what Leonardo looked like. He was a very good-looking kid because Verrocchio, the year that Leonardo arrives, does a statue of David. Good-looking statue of David. And we even have in the center there a drawing by one of the other young people in the studio of Leonardo modeling for David. But the cool thing about Verrocchio's studio is it wasn't just an artist's shop. It did everything. It did pageants and plays for the Medici family. So Leonardo's first job is as a theater producer, making costumes, mixing the fantasy and reality of perfect bird wings with lions roaring, but also dragons' heads. A picture of him in which we see how being involved in the theater allows him to marry fantasy with reality. He even makes the ingenious props that bring the angels down from the rafter for one of the plays. And lo and behold, you have what people call the first helicopter. That drawing was for a play, but Leonardo, always mixing fantasy and reality, decides, well, that's cool, and the rest of his life he's trying to build flying machines. So the art and the engineering and the fantasy and the reality come together with a guy who believes that engineering and technology and art and society and the humanities all go together. And he was, of course, still a good painter. This is Verrocchio's thing, but Leonardo gets to do the dog and the twisting Tobias. We see a lifelike to it that the other painters at the time couldn't create. And most importantly, Verrocchio paints the baptism of Christ. And Leonardo gets to do two things, a backdrop and one of the angels. We see in Leonardo that love of the curling river being like the veins of the earth, but then connecting to the human. We'll see that in everything. It'll, of course, culminate with the Mona Lisa. Here it's very literal because he's doing from the eons of time, the veins of the earth, and John the Baptist pouring the water over Jesus. So it connects to him, and the ripples by the ankles of Jesus are scientifically perfect. They ripple in exactly a mathematically perfect way that a kid who liked to put obstacles in the streams around Vinci learned how to do. And then he does the angel, the one on the far left. Something new in Renaissance art, an angel with emotion on her face as well as movement in his body. I said her, I keep forgetting that Leonardo is very androgynous, but that's supposed to be a male angel. But you see the emotions, many emotions on the face. Verrocchio painted the other angel, the one to the right, and the only emotion on that angel's face is, how did I get here next to this more beautiful angel? He also has his first commission. It's the wife of a cloth merchant in Florence. And as always, we see the rivers coming down from the ancient eons of time and connecting into the body, us connected to the spiritual creation. We see her in three-quarters profile, beautiful curls of hair, and some emotion, mysterious emotion. But it's not a perfect painting. The eyes aren't quite right. Near the end of his life, he would, once again, paint the same painting almost. The wife of a cloth merchant from Florence in three-quarters profile with the river coming in. This isn't the Mona Lisa, but it's clearly the painting of the kid who would go on to paint the Mona Lisa. And everything is dramatic. It's not like a single scene. It is because he loves the theater. And you see the second in the Adoration of the Magi, you see not just a scene, but a movement with the second king doing the gift, the first king bowing down, Joseph looking into it, people striking their heads in awe. And typical of Leonardo, he doesn't finish it. He just can't get it right because it's too much of a swirl and curl of emotion. I wonder, why does he not finish his drawings? Somebody asked me today, and I said, it's a question I would most ask Leonardo. Is what were the things you didn't finish? This is another painting he did not finish as a young man in Florence, St. Jerome in the Wilderness. He couldn't get the neck muscles right. He was a perfectionist. That's not how he painted the neck muscles when he originally did it as a young man in Florence. 30 years later, on the far right, he's doing dissections in Milan, in the basement of the hospital there, dissecting 30 human corpses and trying to figure out the neck muscles. He goes back after 30 years to correct the neck muscles in St. Jerome in the Wilderness. Still doesn't finish the painting, but it gives me this clue that one of the things he did was he just didn't let things go. He just didn't say, well, that's good enough. He kept holding them and holding them until he could finally perfect them or give up and put them aside. As was said, I tried to approach him not through his painting masterpieces, but through his notebooks. We have 7,200 pages of his notebooks, and you see his mind dancing across nature in every one of the pages. And it helped me do something that previous writers had not fully done, which is connect his daily interest in art and engineering and technology to his works and paintings and everything else. The great thing is that here in Madrid, or two of the best notebooks, Telefónica has done the most amazing digitation of them, as you said, digitalization of them. As you said, it was so useful to be able to go that most of the notebooks are not available, not digitized. And it meant that in my research, I had to not only come here, but go to Florence, where there's some, and Paris, and Venice, and Milan, and London, and Windsor. So it wasn't the hardest job in the world, but I'm hoping that for the 500th, we're going to talk about the display that Christian Galvez is going to help do of the Codexes Madrid, but I hope that everywhere that they have these notebooks, they'll display them, and maybe we can bring together all the catalogs and put them together. Here is just a typical notebook page where he's done a tree, and he connects the tree to the torso of one of the warriors he puts in his pageants of plays. But if you look carefully, you can see he's discovered the law of branching, now called Leonardo's law, where if a trunk of a tree branches into 5 branches or 4 branches, the cross-section area of each branch is equal to the total cross-section of the trunk. And he's discovered that's true of the human body as well. That's how our arteries work. So he's always seeing the patterns in nature. Up on the top left again, those swirls and quirls and curls of hair and swirls of water and spirals that he loves, including a stab at the math of them. On the right, he's still trying to get the most basic of all mathematical puzzles, which is how to square the circle, how to create a square that's the exact same size as a circle using only a ruler and a protractor. Something that's not possible to do mathematically exactly because pi is an irrational number, but Leonardo finds ways to do it geometrically as a kid. Here in his, now he's about to reach 30 when he does this page, and throughout his life, he's always passionate about this beauty of transforming shapes. And of course, on every page, there's that list of things he wants to do each week. Questions he wants answered. On this page, we have, why is the sky blue? He has described the tongue of a woodpecker. Now, who wakes up one morning and decides they need to know what a tongue of a woodpecker looks like? How would you even find out? I mean, I guess you get a woodpecker and try to open it, but that's Leonardo. He doesn't need it to paint a flight of birds or to build a flying machine. He needs it because he's Leonardo. He wants to know what the tongue looks like. There's another thing on, why do people yawn on the list? And my favorite is because he's turned 30 at this point. The very bottom is a recipe for boiling the husks or shells of nuts, certain type of nut, a walnut, in oil. And you can put it on your hair, and it becomes, he says, a tawny hair dye. Now, I pause for a second and I realize, oh, I get it. He's human. He's very vain, very good looking, and now he's 30, and he's worried about going gray, and he's starting to dye his hair. And I said, man, I love you, Leonardo. That is really good that you're that real and that personal. At that point, too, he meets his first boyfriend, Salai, where you get to know a lot about Salai and his wonderful curly hair that Leonardo luxuriated in. But at this point, he finally decides to leave leave Florence for Milan. And as Javier said, he writes the greatest job application letter in history. It's 11 paragraphs long, and he's tired of painting. I mean, he's put aside all these paintings. 2 of those paintings he didn't finish. His father had served as a notary for. So he's obviously a little bit in an uncool situation with his dad because he didn't finish them. He's run into some problems. His hair is going gray. He was arrested once for sodomy. So it's about time he leaves Florence, and he goes as part of a cultural delegation as a musician because he's invented musical instruments because he loves sound waves. I mean, this guy does everything. So he writes a letter to the Duke of Milan that Javier mentioned, and it's 11 paragraphs long, and the first 10 paragraphs are all about technology. He thinks of himself as a tech person, an engineer. I can build great bridges, he said. I can divert the course of waters. I know how to design great buildings. I can make wonderful weapons of war. Only in the 11th paragraph, the final one, does he say, I can also paint. So he becomes the painter and engineer and painter to the Duke of Milan. And among the things he does is he revels in being in a group of people at the court of Milan who have such diverse interests, even more so than in Florence. There's Luca Pacioli, the mathematician, Dado Bernanke, the architect. There's poets and playwrights and, musicians all at the court. And Leonardo and a group of friends are asked to help figure out how to help improve the cathedral in Milan. Now, Leonardo, like Steve Jobs, believed that simplicity was the soul of beauty. As you look at the cathedral, you realize this is not the soul of beauty. This is a Gothic, ugly monstrosity. And Leonardo and his friends want to build a circle in a square tower on top, a lantern tower. As you can see, they don't succeed. The Duke of Milan and his advisors decide to build a horrible Gothic lantern tower. But Leonardo and his friends decide they're going to study the proportions of a human and how humans fit into architecture, technology, everything else. So there he is with his friend Donato Bramante on the right. On the left, there's Leonardo wearing the purple and pink tunics he liked, with the notebooks that are written from left to right, because he's, from right to left, because he's left-handed. Those wonderful, well-proportioned body, that square jaw, and of course, the long, flowing, curly locks of blonde, or maybe dyed blonde hair at this point. And they decide to figure out the perfect proportions of a church. These are Leonardo's drawings, the circles and the squares, the geometry of it all. And they know of a book by Vitruvius, an ancient Roman architect who had written a manuscript on architecture that had recently been rediscovered, because the Renaissance was about the rediscovery of classical wisdom. And Vitruvius said that the proportions of a church should reflect the proportions of a human. Leonardo is a total geek. 420 or so measurements of humans, from the neck to the cheekbone, to the nipples, to the lips. Standing, running, riding. He makes his assistants do all these poses so he can get every single one of the proportions right. And at the same time, he's still geeking out, still trying hard to figure how do you square the circle. So they go to Pavia, and they help build the church there. I was just there last week, and it is a gorgeous circle in a square. It is not a Gothic monstrosity. And at the library near Pavia, there is a copy, one of the copies of the manuscript of Vitruvius. So Leonardo and his friends all together, people think that Leonardo does these things all alone in some garret. But no, he's there with his friends, and they decide they're going to do an illustration for the Vitruvian manuscript. They're going to show what Vitruvius says, which is the proportions of a man reflected in the proportions of creation, the proportions of a church. And so they do it. Francesco Di Giorgio, Giacomo, Andrea. We have a wonderful scene in the notebooks where they have a dinner at Giacomo d'Andrea's house right when they get back from Pavia. And Leonardo brings Salai, his very young boyfriend, who spills wine on the table. So you can imagine them sitting there, each doing their drawing of Vitruvian man, hoping that young Salai doesn't mess it up with the wine. And then Leonardo does it. Quite simply, it's in a different league. It's a perfect piece of anatomy. Every proportion of the human body is right. It's an interesting piece of math, because Vitruvius had said that the circle, the center of creation, should be the navel. But the center of the earth is the genitals. So Leonardo takes his protractor, compass needle, punches it right in the middle, and there's the navel, and the circle, the navel's at the center. And he puts a circle on the base of the square, but he has the genitals at the center of the square. And in order to make that work, the circle has to go up higher than the square, as you notice. And what does that do? Almost in a mystical way, with the proportions of a human helping you, it squares the circle. It creates a circle the same size as a square. And when I went to go see it in Venice, they, bring it out if you really ask them to. You're staring at it, and you realize it's a beautiful piece of art, too, with the left-handed cross-hatchings, the shadings. I mean, remember what his friends have been doing, little stick figures, and there's Leonardo doing something of unnecessary beauty, because to him beauty matters. And then you see the stare of that face. And you go back and think for a second, where have I seen that face before? And you realize it's Leonardo doing a self-portrait. Leonardo saying, here I am, standing naked in the earth and in God's creation, and I'm asking myself the ultimate question, how do I fit in? Leonardo does that with, these are from the Codex Madrid, which is why they're so important. These are the wonderful pictures you have here at the National Library that Christian's going to tell you about in a little while. But the thing about them is not only that they're wonderful works of mechanics, they're also beautiful pieces of art. Everything he does, all of his science, even when he's working with Cesare Borgia, his only military weapon that he does that's truly important is he invents the concept of the aerial map. This is before there are planes or birds or drones to do it, but he and Salai, they're holed up in a town called Imola with Cesare Borgia and Machiavelli for one winter. Leonardo DiCaprio has bought the rights to my book, and I think it will center around this amazing winter when you have Borgia, Da Vinci, and Machiavelli working together, and young Salai is pacing off the town so Leonardo can do the beautiful maps. And over again, you see the drama and the science of what he does reflected both in his art and in his science. You see the inner emotions, because he's done something new, which is show how human emotions are reflected by outward gestures. This is odd. I mean, something surprising her. It's Ludovico, the Duke of Milan's mistress. And it's almost clear that the Duke has walked in and she has turned her head and the light catches her, and the ermine she's holding has the same inner expressions and inner emotions. This is not something we had seen in art before, but it's somebody who connects emotion, humanities, art, and of course science. And then there's the great painting of the Last Supper. When you look at it, it's once again a wealth of emotion, inner emotion reflected by outward expression, his strength. But it also looks a bit strange. If you look at the perspective lines, they all come from the forehead of Jesus, and yet the walls go in a little bit faster. I mean, why are the walls coming in that fast? Well, that's what a theater designer, that's what Leonardo did when he did stages. You put the scenery in, it slopes in, makes the stage look deeper. And so Leonardo has done that. He's also made it a dramatic narrative, not a moment. It's as if we can feel Jesus saying, one of you shall betray me. And the ripples come out so that the first set of disciples are saying, is it I, Lord? And they're just hearing it, and it bounces back. And it's as if you're getting to the next scene, as if it's, or the next verse, as if it's a ongoing scene with Jesus saying, he that dippeth his hand. And then you look, by that point your eye moves to Judas dipping his hand in the bread. And finally, Jesus reaching forward to the institution of the Eucharist, reaching for the bread and the wine. But what's interesting is the things that seem odd and don't work. The windows are in the back. Why is the light on that wall in the front? Why is the table tilted that way? Well, it's a stage set. Even though the light seems to be coming from the window, it comes from the front. And then you go a step deeper and you actually visit it, and you go to the dining hall in the monastery, and you look and you see at the upper left, there's the only window in the room. And so what Leonardo is doing is mixing reality with fantasy. The light every day when they come in, the light comes from that window. And it comes from that window and hits that wall and hits the front of the table. So he's mixing reality and fantasy as only Leonardo can do. This was the one that we didn't buy, that sold for $420 million. People were skeptical, and still are, that he painted most of it. Maybe it was assisted. People say, well, look at the right hand of Jesus, the blessing hand. That couldn't have been Leonardo. Leonardo loves sfumato, the blurring of lines. This is very sharp. And it was a criticism of this painting that clearly the hand was done by a bad student. But I discovered by looking at the notebooks at this very period, 1504, Leonardo is writing his treatise on perspective. Christian gave me a wonderful copy of the Trattoria, the treatise on painting, which also has part of it on perspective. And at that moment, he's talking about how in the distance, things get smaller. That's called distance perspective. Also in the distance, there's haze, so things get, blurred out. But he says there's something called sharpness perspective, which is at a certain point, because we have two eyes and it focuses right here at about arm's length is a focal point where things are very sharp. And so he talks about things looking abnormally sharp when they're reaching out like that. And I'm sure that's what he's doing with that hand. It makes it look like it's coming off of the panel. It makes it look like Jesus is blessing you, that is coming towards you. And so that's why I was convinced it truly was a Leonardo. Once again, we see too how the science picks up everything he does. This is his studies of the human heart, and what he figures out is that the heart valve doesn't open and shut. He's dissected the human bodies, figured out the heart, then does a living pig so he can look at the beating heart. And he realizes, unlike people before, that it's not that the blood opens the valve and then pushes it down. He writes on this right-hand side, that crumples the valve. If that happens, what it is that a fluid, when it goes from a larger to a smaller chamber, forms that swirl and spiral that he's ever loved since a kid. And so he explains that that makes the heart valve go open. And he's right. It turned out to be 200 years later that they discovered that this is how the heart valve opens. But it's now called, the valve is something Leo discovered. What I love too is at the very end of his heart drawings, of all the pieces he does on the heart, he keeps drawing cross sections of it and writing about it. And then he draws it down here for one last time, and he gets distracted because he's Leonardo. He gets bored. He doesn't finish. Instead, he sketches his boyfriend Salai to show the heart inside Salai, which I thought was sweet. Everything there, when I saw that at Windsor, I asked the curator, was that a piece of art or was that a piece of science he was doing? And the curator said to me, I don't think Leonardo would have made that distinction. And indeed, when you talk about tech and society and the humanities, Leonardo did not make a distinction between the beauty of nature and the beauty of art and what he was doing. And always, until the end of the life, it's always that flow of water, that stream, as he's searching for the way. And finally, I'll end with the dissection of the human lips. He does every muscle and every nerve that touches the human lips. He even figures out that your bottom lip is a separate muscle from that your top lip isn't a muscle on its own, so you can actually pucker your bottom lip alone. You can pucker both lips, but you can't pucker your top lip alone. I see one person trying it. It's not pretty. Wait till you get home and try it. But as he's doing all of that, on the very last page, if you see faintly at the top, he's starting to draw what will become the most famous smile in history. Same time as he's doing the dissections, he's drawing the smile. 1503, he starts. For 16 years, he does this wife of a cloth merchant. Again, the waters are coming down from ancient creation, connecting to the roads of civilization and into the veins of the human. But we have the enigmatic smile, and most importantly, we have the lips that are mysterious. Now, one of the things Leonardo had learned from his optics experiments was when he dissects the eye, he figures out that at the center of our retina we see black and white detail. On the edges of our retina we see shadows and color better. So he makes it so that the very edges of her lips in black and white actually go straight. She's not smiling. But the colors and shadows turn up. For 16 years, he did layer after layer to make the science of that right, because he knew the light would go in, each layer, sometimes hitting a pigment, coming back. But the smile would change as your vantage changed. The smile would change as you move. The more you looked for the smile, the less it was there. The more you stared at it, the more it disappeared. But as your eye went to her forehead or to her chin, the smile would turn back on. In the Prado is, of course, the truly wonderful copy that one of his students made while he was painting the Mona Lisa. It's a gorgeous painting that the Prado has restored magnificently. And what it does is it shows the beautiful rose color that he loved to wear, that her sleeve is. You see her veil, and you can actually see the cloth underneath the veil. Everything about it makes you think, the Louvre should get its act together and actually clean the original Mona Lisa, which is covered by dark varnish. But the one thing that's not as good, with all due respect, in the Prado copy is the smile. The student, maybe it was Salai, that's what it says on the plaque next to it on the Prado, that it may have been Salai, maybe Melzi, his later companion. Whoever it was just couldn't do that perfect smile. So when you go look at it, or there's a picture of it in my book, you can admire it, but understand what the smile was about. He brought it, and he had it by his side all the way through his travels. He doesn't give it to the cloth merchant or sell it. It's with him when he finally goes to France as the guest of Francis I, to have his own, have a patron in the king, and lives at Amboise, a beautiful manor house. He's still a bit tormented, still doing the deluge drawings, but he is mainly there in his chamber with 3 of the paintings he carried with him over the Alps. St. John, the Virgin and Mother and Child, and of course, the Mona Lisa. And I went to go look at his last notebook page. Thought, okay, what will this tell us? There he is at his manor house next to the King's Chateau in France. And what he's doing near the very end of his life is he's still trying to square the circle. He's using a trick of Euclid that uses right triangles of different length legs, and you make a shaded area. That becomes the center of a circle. And he's describing, even though he'll know he will never get to that, he's hoping he'll just get one step closer to the spirit manifest in that mathematical brushstroke that paints nature. And even he has a little chart showing each of the 4 things, how it works, until finally we get to the last line. And those of you who can read mirror script in Italian to see the word minestrone, he describes what's happening, what he's trying, and then right here he says, but the soup is getting cold. He realizes he's near the end. Salai, Melzi, his cook Matarine, others are downstairs waiting for him. But he's still trying to get us one step closer to the spirit manifest in the laws of the universe. Thank you all very much. Jose is going to come and we'll do Q&A, but before that, I wanted to bring Christian Galvez up. And Jose, you could get yourself settled. I don't know if you have a microphone, Christian, or I'll give you mine, or is there a handheld here? Oh, great. Christian is doing a multimedia exhibition that starts in October that the world, I hope, will come see, but especially I hope you will. And it shows those wonderful codices Madrid.
Thank you very much, Walter. Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, Walter. Thank you very much. Thank you to Penguin Random House, but thank you to Walter because, well, I have some minutes. I'll be very fast. So he doesn't know anything about my work in audiovisual communication. Our relationship has just last 24 hours. We talked about Leonardo. We didn't speak about television. I would like to highlight the big quality that he's really generous. I'm really moved, and my experience on TV doesn't make. I mean, I'm nervous, although I have a great experience on TV. I'm able to speak at his presentation, so that's great. But he's a great person because he has shown how brilliant these people were. And I mean, they're like, if they were wearing jeans. I mean, I've been studying Leonardo for many years, and Walter has really moved me, and he has made me laugh with what he was telling me. Because the important thing is not what he explains. It is how he explains it, and he reaches everyone. He's a mainstream author. as a curator, we will have the official exhibition in Spain of Leonardo Da Vinci. Here we will have two headquarters. We will have the National Library and Has Palace, where we will be able to have a look at the Madrid Codex 1 and 2, and the Palacio de las Alhajas. Apart from many interactive objects, we will have for the first time in Spain the Tabula Lucana. We know how Raffaello's face was, we know how Michelangelo's face was, but we don't know how the Leonardo da Vinci's face was. That drawing, that bald, that person with a beard, it appeared for the first time in 1810. And we didn't know how he was represented since 1519 until 1810. Or we know it because for the first time we'll have in Spain the Tabula Lucana. So that image that had an influence over all artists until 1810, and even the master Walter Isaacson has used for his book. So we'll be here from November to May, and after that we'll start our national tour. And he is the main protagonist today. So he writes about genius, and according to the dictionary here in our country says that the genius people are the ones that have that capability of doing different things and things that are really worth it. So we have a genius with us.
Walter Isaacson, thank you very much,
so
sir.
much. And we look forward to the wonderful exhibition, and I hope to come back and see it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Jose.
Well, thank you so much, Walter. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to host Walter Isaacson together with Fundación Telefónica in our Tech and Society program. I will switch to Spanish. Since you have direct translation, it will be easier to start the conversation among all of us. I have been very fortunate to read all your books, except this one, and I'm really looking forward to this summer when I will be able to sit down and have many hours to go through it. But listening to your talk, escuchando su presentación.
But listening to your talk, I was wondering something that is very important for our societies in order to think for our well-being, or so to speak. When we want to generate cities or countries where innovation is at the center, how important it is to find the right context from a point of view of a combination of values. I mean, if Florence, when at the time of Leonardo, as Walter has explained, is so attractive, is because there are some values that are important, the ethos, the identity of this city. And in his books, it's very important to see what communities are created for innovation. And I would like you to elaborate a little bit on this.
One important ingredient is to be comfortable with and even feel excited about diversity. We have had a reaction in Europe and the United States against what had been a tolerance of diversity, whether it's immigrants, whether it's gays, whether it's whatever it may be. But if you look at the most creative places, San Francisco in the 1970s, Philadelphia in the 1770s, Florence in the 1470s, there were many types of people coming in, and people found value in the different types of people who were there. I also think that you can't just be a city of engineers. This is why Silicon Valley will not be the next wave of the digital revolution. They have a lot of engineers, but there's not a lot of artists. There's not a lot of creative people. And so you're seeing creativity in America move from Silicon Valley to San Francisco, obviously, but then to places like Austin and Nashville and Columbus and New York and Boston and New Orleans that have a history of arts and creativity.
Me gustaría también preguntarle, me ha gustado mucho.
I would like to ask you, well, I've loved that sentence, that the proportion of a church has to reflect the proportion of a human being. And with this analogy, I would like to speak about technology and what's the proportion of a technology so that it can reflect that proportion of the human being. Walter knows technology very well. He has thought about it from a humanistic point of view, and he has defended all great chances that have come along with the technological revolution. But he has also made us think about this adequate proportions. What is the right proportion for technology so that it can be a human proportion?
We talk about, say, artificial intelligence, we're approaching it the wrong way. The success of technology throughout history, and more so even today, comes not from technology that replaces humans, but technology that connects to humans. Ways to make beautiful interfaces, like on your phone. Ways to have a computer and a human work together and augment. So when we talk about the proportions of our technology, we have to keep it on a human scale. This is why the humanities are important. This is why Steve Jobs loved to study dance and art and poetry, because the technology has to connect with human emotions, and it also has to connect with human values. At the moment, our technology has deviated from the individual values that we tend to hold dear, starting with the age of Leonardo, which is the individual as a repository of rights, privacy, other things. And now our technology is stripping us of some of our privacy and some of our ability to connect in a civil fashion, whether it's Facebook or Google. Europe is leading the way to helping us out of this mess. In America, we're not very good right now in terms of regulation or dealing with technology, but I think that the concept of society's role in regulating technology, Europe will be the leader, not only when it comes to privacy, but when it comes to responsibility for what you say and what you do online. Where in America, you know, somebody can say whatever they want online and nobody knows who they are and can't be traced down. But in much of what Europe is doing, it's trying to create a more humanistic version of technology.
Mm-hmm. Precisamente el fin de semana pasado.
Last weekend, President Macron, when he met with the main technological companies and CEOs, spoke about the great influence that these companies have. Just one last question from my side, because I would like to open this Q&A session to all the audience, this great speech. How can we do so that policy can be a field where we have innovation? One of the qualities of Aspen is that it works with politics from all parties. We try to help them to have an inspiring idea. So, as happened at the end of the Second World War, how can we make that a great institutional political innovation? Because we need it now in those fields.
Javier and I were talking about it at lunch. We were very creative and did institutions that we needed to deal with the challenges right after World War II. We did NATO and the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations and Radio for Europe that dealt with everything from communications to banking to trade. And those organizations are good, but they're not well suited to the challenges of the digital age. And so I would hope that somebody, preferably out of Europe, would help start an organization like the Internet, we could call it, I mean, I'm making it up, an Internet Digital Economy Accord, which idea, you know, it spells out. But you could say, here are the values we're going to try to do on the internet, and here's some of the things we're going to do to nudge or push corporations and people to follow those values. We don't necessarily have to make them into laws, but we can have an incentive for people who create good content, for example, to have a way to get royalties from those content instead of Facebook and Google taking all the advertising revenue. We can say that if you do something online, you're held responsible for it, and you're responsible for your own actions online, just as you are in the real world. So you can be, held accountable if you do something that libels or hate or is fake news or whatever it may be. That's difficult. To do this in a way that allows innovation, doesn't have heavy-handed regulation, allows corporations like Telefonica, which is at the forefront of figuring out the relationship of technology and society, to do it, but allows some international accord that says, just as we have rules of the road about trade, Javier did the rules of the road about nuclear weapons. We have rules of the road about banking and how it works, or about fraud. We need some common rules for how the digital economy is going to work.
Muchísimas gracias.
But it's not going to come from the United States. You have to do it here.
Nos hemos apuntado.
Well, we've noted down our homework. So please you have to say your name and to make the you have to ask the question so that we can have many interventions, okay?
My name is Pino Bethencourt. I work in leadership and coaching. My question is about the shadows in Leonardo Da Vinci's character. Did you find obsessiveness, or did he feel like an outsider, and did that play a role in his drive to innovate and to perfect things constantly?
That's a good question, because biographers have to learn that the people they write about are human. And they're not saints, they're not statues, they're actually real people. And Steve Jobs was a jerk at times, and you have to write that. So Leonardo had his flaws. And people say, well, that's a shame. I say, no, that makes him human. He procrastinated. As I said, he didn't finish things. He was deeply tormented. When I showed those swirls and whirls at the end of his life, he wrote the most tormented, depressed things about, did I ever accomplish anything? He had anxieties. He was elated at times. He had trouble making commitments in various places. He would move from patron to patron, perhaps because his father, was not his legitimate father and had sort of half abandoned him or didn't necessarily make him legal. That takes Freud to figure out. But this was not a perfect person carved in marble like, a statue when he was a young David. This is a guy who had his torments. And by the way, what's particularly lovable about him is that he wasn't touched by lightning with true genius the way Newton or Einstein was. He didn't have a mind that was so amazing that you and I can't understand it. He had trouble doing math. He makes a lot of math mistakes, even when he's adding up his accounts. He has trouble learning Latin. There's a whole page I have in the book of him trying to learn Latin words. His genius came because he pushed himself to be curious and observant. You and I are never going to be a genius like Einstein. We will never be able to push ourselves to think like him. But we can push ourselves to be more like Leonardo.
Muchísimas gracias. Sí, por favor.
I'll start. Okay, I'll start. To your right. Yeah. Thank you very much, first of all, for the talk. I cannot even express how it resonates with my thoughts. And that's why I want your help. You say how important it is to bring artists into the table in our cities. However, when it comes to art and artists, normally our parents and our business environment tell us, that's great, but focus on the more important things, science, technology, engineering, and math. So my question to you is, what a manager or parent need to know? Why we need to encourage our kids or our employees to actually pursue artistic practices as part of their education and training for life?
Well, Steve Jobs pursued art and dance and calligraphy and poetry when he was in college. Bill Gates takes no arts courses, doesn't love the humanities, doesn't graduate from Harvard because he hasn't finished hasn't taken the necessary arts and humanities courses, but does only applied math. When it comes to creating a music player, Steve Jobs created the iPod. Bill Gates created the Zune. There's probably nobody in this room who remembers what a Zune is. It was the ugliest music player that was so non-intuitive you couldn't figure out how to get to your song. It looked like it had been designed in a basement in Uzbekistan. And this is what happens when you have no feel for music, no feel for art. You do wonderful coding, but you don't create something that touches us as humans. Teachers and parents who say that you should do engineering and coding and computer software and not worry about the arts are doing a great disservice to their children. Because 10 years from now, machines will be able to code for us better than we will. But it'll be the people who bring the creativity, the art, the emotion, the humanity, and connects them to the technology. They will be the successful ones. And the ones who have to do the moral questions of whether or not, we should have privacy online, or whether or not we should allow people to say things anonymously, or even tougher questions about technology. Should we allow genetic engineering to make our children taller or blonder hair, or whatever we might want? Those will be done by people who know how to make values judgments like we study at Aspen, or aesthetic judgments, or have a feel for what the humanities teach us, which is empathy for other humans. And so if you're just an engineer 20 years from now, you're going to lose out. You need those things that make you have morals and values and empathy for other humans, and to be able to create products that touch the human heart, not just an engineer's heart.
My name is Jean-Jacques de Grove. My question somewhat overlaps the previous one. What implications did you draw from this research in terms of education in the 21st century?
Well, besides the question of arts and humanities and literature, philosophy, and history being an important part of education, another one is that the goal of education should not be to give children the facts, but to stimulate their curiosity to find out the facts. Einstein ran away from his school in Germany because he felt he was being crammed full of facts. And he decided he wanted to go to a place, and there was a place in Switzerland, where they just allowed you to be creative and to explore. And he said at the end of his life, he said, I'm not necessarily smarter than the other physicists around me, although he was. He said, I'm more curious. He said, I still stand like a child with wonder at nature. Just like Leonardo, he wrote, Einstein did in his notebook, why is the sky blue? And to the end of his life, in his last notebook page, he's still trying to do the field equations of what happens when a wave and a particle, when quantum theory and relativity theory, or gravity and electromagnetism, when they interact. That type of wonder and curiosity every child has at age 10. But then our educators beat it out of them. They say, quit asking so many questions and learn your multiplication table or whatever. We just have to not teach our children how to be curious and have a sense of wonder. We just have to protect it so they don't lose that.
Muchas gracias.
Hi, my name is Rodrigo Taramona. First of all, thanks, Mr. Isaacson, for the speech. It was really inspiring. When you were talking about how Europe is handling this technology advancement, and how North America, or even you can put in China and maybe the Russia into the equation, I feel like maybe what Europe is doing is like sacrificing, because in a world where economic growth and power over other nations is so important and like the ultimate goal of these players, how do you think will it unfold for countries that are actually like wishing to take a more moral and passive step towards it?
Yeah, I think one problem in Europe, which is a problem in other places in the United States besides Silicon Valley, is people don't tolerate risk enough. Leonardo kept failing. He failed at making a flying machine. He failed at diverting a river. He failed at making a tank. He failed at finishing the treatise on painting. His young pupil had to do it for him. But he was tolerated. Every time he made a failure, they would hire him and he would do bigger and better things. Likewise in Silicon Valley, you can fail, but then, and I think in Europe there's less tolerance for risk and failure. However, I do think that the restrictions on monopoly, which I hope the European Union is going to do, that prevent Facebook and Google and other near monopolies from dominating other fields and destroying competition, allows competition to arise here in a way that might be more difficult in the United States. If you're creating a social network for people who love dogs, who want to share, they want to date people who have the same type of dog. I'm making this up. It's not a great idea. If you did it in America and it started to be successful, Facebook would kill it by doing it. In Europe, you have a antitrust and monopolies regime that would push back if Facebook or Google or a big company tried to kill competition. So there's hope in Europe that we'll have some competitors. And I hope there'll be competing social networks. Because I think Facebook has become a problem, is a nice way to say it. So I don't know why in some dorm room in Madrid or Barcelona or Leipzig or Utrecht or Amsterdam, there's not a couple of young kids saying, we will create a social network that's more respectful of its users. And I keep thinking, because it's not going to come out of China either. I mean, China's got a whole different set of values. So I hope somewhere there's some kids in some dorm room somewhere that are saying, I can create a social network that's more civil. I can create something like Twitter in which real people say real things, not anonymously, and they can have real discussions. Or I can create something like Google, but that rewards good content that people have worked hard to make instead of rewarding whatever, clickbait people have created for advertisers. These are all things left to be, or maybe invent a way to do small payments on the web, which the big monopolies in the United States are not going to allow, but to say, all right, if I like Christian's catalog that he does for a show, or I like, Jose does a poem, I can pay a little bit of money. We can have small payment systems. All these things are yet to be invented, and in some ways I'm just hoping, I don't want that invention to come out of China. I mean, I won't go into that, but China is not the place I feel comfortable with individual autonomy. And I don't think they can come out of the United States. So, technological inventions that respect individuality and humanity and civil discourse and civic life and the Aspen values, that's more likely to come out of Europe, but you need to at least hope for it or cheerlead for it and maybe even try to find it.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos tiempo para un par de preguntas más.
We have time for just a couple more questions. One over here and one over there. There's one over here, right in front of you. My name is Carlos Padron. I would like to have to hear about comments about time, your feelings about time. I'm under the impression that one of the fundamental problems today, or one of the things that we need to control is time. There's a problem about immediateness in the news, in what we know, in the response you have to give. And I think that, and you've mentioned it, and I think you're quite right, and everything around things about creativity, the criteria, the elements of creativity, and I think one of the elements of creativity is time as well. We need to learn how to wait, to be patient. I think one of the features of Leonardo, one characteristic, is that he did things, he waited, he pondered, and then came back to the same subject matter. I think you mentioned that in your presentation.
Which is, our technology has made things go so fast. We don't pause. And what Leonardo teaches us is that it's good to pause every now and then. Take your time. He does it to a fault. He pauses on St. Jerome and never finishes him, but he takes his time. He takes 16 years to get the smile right of the Mona Lisa. But more importantly, he's always noticing things. And so I now try to be a little bit more like Leonardo, which is, when I walk through town, instead of always trying to do 100 things, I'll take my time sometimes and look at how light from the setting sun hits a curved surface of a wall, and how the shadow changes around the curve. This is something Leonardo looked at over and over again and wrote about. He would look at how the light hit a shiny leaf, and there would be what he called luster, or a spark on it. He looked at how birds flew, and whether their wings went up faster or down faster, for different types of birds. He looked at it all. That takes a little time. It means that when we're walking through an airport, we should pause and look at how the kid watches the light coming in from the skyline. But we are pushed by our technology sometimes into going too fast. That's not the fault of the technology. That's our fault. There are a few things I've done in life. One is, and forgive me if there's anybody from a television station, my wife and I decided to get rid of our television. We have no television. This is great. We don't get the news every hour being updated. When we want to go see a sports match of the New Orleans Saints, we go to the corner where there's a restaurant and a bar, and there are people watching it together. But you have to give up some technology at certain times to say, all right, I'm going to control my own time instead of letting technology control my time.
Muchas gracias. Última pregunta.
Hello, Mr. Isaacson. Thank you very much. My name is Jesus Novillo. I am a leadership, entrepreneurship, and innovation student. And I completely agree with you with the fact that we have to embrace diversity in order to get innovation running. And there is something that you said before, that it's great that here in Europe we are doing regulations about being responsible of your online actions, the fake news. I think this is a huge problem worldwide. Mm-hmm. And but you said something that in the United States everybody is able to say whatever they want, and not here. And maybe I misunderstood, but don't you think that if we cut off the freedom of expression, which is a fundamental right of free countries, as we are
right here. I think we have to nurture free speech, and certainly free speech is respected in Europe far more than like China or any place like that. In Europe, if you engage in pervasive hate speech, say in Germany, touting the Nazis, you're held responsible for that. There's even a law that says at a certain point, speech becomes so hateful that we curtail it. You have a right to be forgotten here, where, Google doesn't have the right to pull up certain search results if you've decided you want that to be forgotten. So those are curtailments of free speech that happen here that don't happen in the United States. It's tricky. It's dangerous. You don't want to go too far. You also don't want to get it to a place in the United States where people can put up racist, hateful, fake news that says a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., near where I live, is actually a ring of people having sex with young people that Hillary Clinton is helping to fund. And people started believing that, and there was a shooting. Somebody went there with a gun to the pizza place. At that point, the person who put up those lies should be held responsible. But that's hard to do in the United States. A, because we don't hold people responsible sometimes for what they say, and B, because the internet makes it hard to figure out who put up that fake news. Maybe it was a troll in Russia. I don't know. But we need to create a network that if somebody puts up something that says this pizza parlor owner is having racist sex with children, we have a network where we can track down who said it and whether they should be responsible. When the first networks were invented, social digital networks, before the internet really became online, there was one called The Well. I don't think you're old enough to remember it. It was done by Stuart Brand in the United States. It actually stood for the Whole Earth Electronic Link, because he had made the Whole Earth catalog. The very first screen you saw when you logged on was, you own your own words. And that meant you could say pretty much whatever you want, but you were held responsible for it. We don't have that now, where people have to take responsibility for the hate speech or the fake news or the libels. And we don't have the technology that says, if you tell me I'm your bank, you need to put your password in so I can tell you about a problem. I don't know whether it's my bank or not. It could be somebody phishing or spamming me. So I think it would be nice to create rules for the internet that Europe could do more easily, because you're not quite as neurotic about regulating expression. That might lead us out of the way. Does that make sense? Because your question was so good. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Muchísimas gracias, Walter. Esta es una conversación que no queremos terminar, y vamos a emplazarte para que nos visites pronto en Madrid o en Barcelona, que vengas de nuevo a España. Esta es tu casa. Gracias por todo lo que has hecho por Aspen Institute estos años en Estados Unidos, por tu inspiración para Aspen España. Gracias a todos ustedes. Walter va a firmar libros para los que quieran y lo que les vamos a pedir es que lo hagamos ahí fuera, donde está preparada una mesa.
My publisher is here, and they have done an amazing job of creating a good work of art out of this book, better than my publishers around the world. It has wonderful paper that recreates it. They have made it a bestseller here in Spain. But I want to thank my publisher and tell them I'll sit out there and sign books if you buy them.
Muchas gracias.
Okay.